As we close our day today, we're going to shift our focus to what Leonardo DiCaprio might be interested in, the environment and climate change. And so PRI, in all of our books and studies, have documented how California's green mandates are imposing huge costs on and tremendous burdens on employers and working Californians. Now, California, of course, does a good job of raising gas and electricity prices with government green policies, but they aren't doing a very effective job in fighting global warming. So we're next going to hear from our friend Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center. And Todd is the author of a terrific new book that's called Time to Think Small, which shows how individual initiative can do a far better job at improving the environment than government green mandates. So please welcome Todd Myers.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I like being in Sacramento and California for a couple of reasons. The first is that my extended family lives in Sacramento, so I've been here many times, and I got the opportunity to go have dinner with my family last night. And second, being from Washington State, I like to be in a state like California, where people on the center right drink as much as I do. I want to talk about environment. I've worked in environmental policy in Washington State for about 25 years. If you had told me in college that I was going to spend 25 years working on environmental issues, I would have thought you were crazy because it was not interesting to me in college. And the people in college I did know who were interested in environmental issues kind of looked weird and smelled bad. But once I got involved and I worked at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, I served on the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council, and I've done a number of things. And what I have learned is that so much of what we think we know about the environment is wrong. And the biggest problem is that people on the center right, people who truly care about good environmental stewardship, have become scared to talk about the issue. And the reason that they become scared to talk about the issue is that the image of environmental activism is this image. It is the image of people throwing soup at the Mona Lisa, activists, doing silly, childish, counterproductive things for the planet. And nobody wants to be associated with that. And so when you associate environmental concern, environmental policy with this sort of image, rational people in the middle, on the center right, anywhere, shy away from talking about these issues because so much of the discussion is irrational. But the fact is that when you look at environmental policies, at the people who actually care about environmental results, it is the people who live on the ground closest to the environment, many of the times the people who do not vote with the people who live in cities where we have paved over concrete environment with concrete. It is the people who live close to nature. And the fact is that the number one thing I want you to take away, if you can take nothing else, is don't be intimidated by talking about the environment. Conservatives tend, when we talk about the environment, we tend to say, oh, it's too expensive, it takes away individual liberty, it's too regulatory. But the number one thing is their policies simply don't work. It is market-based innovation, personal action that is what is most effective at helping the environment. And all of those things are absolutely consistent with the values that we on the center right hold. And let me just give you a few examples. So the first is the Flint water crisis. Many of you are familiar with this. The city of Flint, Michigan switched its water source to looking to reduce their costs. What they didn't realize was that the new water source was corrosive of the lead pipes in the community. Now, it's not necessarily a problem. You can put chemicals and other things into it to reduce the corrosion, but they didn't. And the way that they found out that they hadn't was that the water started looking like this coming out of people's taps. So what was the response of the government? Well, the first reaction of the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality was this quote from the head of DEQ saying, anyone concerned about lead in the drinking water can relax. Well, that wasn't true. There was, in fact, lead in the drinking water. But finally, when they finally realized that there was a problem and they started trying to figure out what to do, the EPA regional office realized that they had sort of this bucket of money that wasn't intended to provide water filters and clean water for people, but they could probably justify it if they stretched a little bit. But ultimately, they decided against it. And this is from my book, and here's what they decided. It says, there was a discussion of using agency resources to purchase water filters for the city's residents. Nervous it would set a precedent for other communities with lead pipes, one EPA official said, "I don't know if Flint is the kind of community we want to go out on a limb for." So if you think that the EPA is looking out for you, when push comes to shove, the political pressures that they have on them are what are going to guide their decision making. And given that choice, who do you trust? Do you trust the EPA, or do you trust the opportunity for people to take power into their own hands to address their own environmental problems? Right now, for the last 50 years, the focus has been on putting power in the hands of government. We have an opportunity to change that. It's not the only example, though, of how our environmental policies have failed. So PERC, a free market environmental think tank in Montana, if you haven't looked them up, they're really fantastic. They have done, it's the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, and they've done an analysis of it. And here's, the results of ESA. Now, ESA, if you tell anybody that ESA is not working, they would be shocked. But here are the actual results. Only 3% of species that listed by the Endangered Species Act have ever recovered. ESA is good at stopping extinction. It's not good at recovery. The U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife actually said, we think about 300 species will be recovered by this time. In fact, only 57 species have recovered. And lastly, 85% of the species that have been listed haven't even completed a quarter of the recovery goals. This is not success. This is not what you hope for in environmental policy. And yet, again, if you ask people for an example of a successful environmental policy, many will point to the ESA. Lastly, from my home state of Washington, our governor, Jay Inslee, considers himself to be sort of the leading climate governor. He actually ran in 2019, albeit fairly unsuccessfully, for president on the claim that he was the leading climate governor in the nation and that he would do for the country what he had done for Washington state. But in fact, Washington has a horrible record of environmental results. Puget Sound salmon populations have declined. Actually, NOAA Fisheries found that between 2004 and 2019, the Chinook salmon populations have gone down. State forests are extremely fire-prone and unhealthy, and now we feel the result of that every summer when we have smoke from giant forest fires, much like you guys have felt in California. But here's my favorite one, which is that he took office in 2013, and every year from 2013 to 2019, CO2 emissions in Washington state have gone up. Now you can say, well, Todd, that's only 2019. That's true, because the state hasn't released data more recent. If you are the climate governor and the most recent data you have, it's 2024, are 5 years old, how serious are you about actually measuring results and finding out what's working? And that's Washington state. We have repeatedly failed. The reason I tell those stories is that conservatives need to have confidence that when they say they care about the environment, that they're not just fighting on this is too expensive or it's bad for freedom, that they realize that our approaches work. So why is this happening? Why is it that all of these policies are failing, right? We hear all the time from the left, from folks, from Leonardo DiCaprio, that we need to do something, and yet the results are not there. And the reason is that environmental policy has in many ways become identity, and like identity politics. They care more about the image of looking like an environmentalist than actually saving the environment. I was in Vegas about a week and a half ago to see U2. It was fantastic. But as I walked out of a casino, there was a guy who came up to me and was kind of scruffy looking, and he said, "Hey, I haven't eaten today. Do you have any money so that I can get some food?" And I said, "If I give you money, how do I know that you're not just going to gamble it? And he says, oh, well, I've got gambling money. So what was his priority, right? His priority was fun over food. And that is the way that we see environmental policy made. The environmental policies that prioritize are the ones that satisfy special interest groups, satisfy a need to look good, but don't actually help the environment. And my favorite example is Portland, Oregon, the voters passed what's called the Clean Energy Fund. So when they came out with their first round of grants, I actually looked at the proposals and calculated how much it cost to reduce 1 metric ton of CO2 in each of the programs. And it's hard to see this, but like that line up there is $10,000 per metric ton. You can invest in projects that reduce a metric ton of CO2 on the open market for $10. So the city of Portland is paying $10,000, 1,000 times what it should cost. And so I pointed this out to a reporter for the Oregonian, and she went to the city officials and the Sierra Club saying, this is what Todd says, what is your response? And this was fantastic. This is actually in the article. It says, but city staff and community leaders involved in climate change and environmental justice work say that's intentional. It's intentional that they are wasting this amount of money. The head of the Sierra Club said the primary drive for putting together the Portland Clean Energy Fund was to guarantee that there would be community benefits for the people who are usually left out due to systemic racism. The goal is not clean energy. The goal is not to fight climate change. The goal is systemic racism. Okay? That shows you that environmental policy is more about identity and identity politics than actually the environment. When you put people in charge, though, you get very different results. Individuals demand that they actually achieve the goals. People on the ground, people who have an incentive. And California provides a great example. So this says 2023, it's actually 2022. Many of you remember in September of 2022, there was energy shortages. And so the state of California did something that they hadn't done before, at least not at this scale, which was they texted people saying, we're facing energy shortages, please conserve where you can. It was not a mandate, it was not required, but the response was amazing. And what you can see is that there was a sharp drop in the amount of demand right when that text went out. And within 15 minutes, demand had dropped 2,000 megawatts. So what is 2,000 megawatts? 2,000 megawatts at that time was 2/3 of all the batteries that were installed in California. So think about all the money that has been spent on all of those batteries to try to stabilize the electrical system, to move solar from the middle of the day to peak hours when it is most used in the early evening. And one text was able to reduce demand by that much. And it wasn't much, right? It was people not washing their dishes, not drying their clothes, turning off a few lights, maybe changing their thermostat, but doing it in a way that suited them, but doing it in a way that actually yielded results. That's the difference between political mandates and personal choice. So what can we do? It's time to democratize environmentalism, and it's time to think small. People think of big problems, and they think there must be big solutions. This is called proportionality bias. But in fact, we see that big problems are often solved by lots of little efforts rather than big government programs or plans. In fact, who says this? Bill Ruckelshaus, who was the first director of the EPA. So he wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal just over a decade ago that said yesterday's solutions worked well on yesterday's problems, but the solutions we devised back in the 1970s aren't likely to make much of a dent in the environmental problems we face today. So much of our environmental policy and thinking is stuck in the 1970s in a world where we have technology and the ability to engage people like never before. And since I am a policy wonk, I am legally obliged to quote at least one Nobel Prize winning economist. I have two. The first is Eleanor Ostrom, who's the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. She focused primarily on solving environmental issues, and she says what we have ignored is what citizens can do and the importance of real involvement of the people versus just having somebody in Washington make a rule. And Ronald Coase said the government administrative machine is not itself costless. It can, in fact, on occasion be extremely costly. And the thing about Ronald Coase is that he talked about the difficulty of solving environmental problems where the cost of information and the cost of action was very high. That is not true anymore. The cost of information is extremely low. We have gone in the last 15 years from not having the iPhone to everybody complaining about all they ever do is stare at their iPhone because the cost of information is so low. We can harness that in a way that we couldn't have just 15 years ago to solve some of these environmental problems and replace the mindset that says only government can do these things. So we need to shift power of stewardship from politicians to people. And this is not only more respectful of individual dignity and freedom, it's not only more likely to create prosperity, it's more effective. It actually solves the environmental problems rather than the record that we have seen with the environmental left and so many of the 1970 approaches to the environment. And I will just give you one big example. So everybody likes to talk about climate change all the time as if it's the only issue. It is far from the only environmental issue. So I want to talk about something that I think everybody is worried about, which is plastic in the ocean. A huge amount of plastic washes into the ocean. You will see a study that says by 2050, there'll be more plastic in the ocean than there are by weight than there are fish. I'm skeptical of this. I think there's a lot of sort of exaggerated research out there, but it gives you a magnitude of how much plastic is washing into the ocean. It's a huge amount. But it's not in the United States. In fact, Sri Lanka, right, this little island country off of the tip of India, puts about 4 times as much plastic into the ocean every year as the entire United States. Banning plastic grocery bags is not going to solve the problem of plastic in the oceans. You have to go to where the problem is and where the research shows is it is in developing countries, especially in Southeast Asia. So how do you address that? A group called Plastic Bank decided to go to those countries and work with people to try to pick up and remove the plastic that might wash into the ocean. Virtually everybody in developing countries, more than 94%, has some kind of cell phone, whether it's a smartphone or just a basic cell phone, and they often use it to get paid. People will, it's basically their bank account. That's why they called it Plastic Bank. And so people go, they pick up the plastic, they turn it into one of the locations that Plastic Bank has in these countries, and they get paid on their phone for the amount that they pick up. Plastic Bank then knows exactly where that plastic was, and so you can go to their webpage and see where all of the plastic that they have picked up, beach by beach, over the course of the years. And there's a rudimentary blockchain so that it's transparent, so that it shows the data, so that you can be sure that this actually happened. Then they take that plastic and they recycle it and they sell it to SC Johnson. So the next time you go to the store and get Windex, you will see one of these stickers down here that says 100% ocean-bound plastic. Now think about this. The technology is cell phones, a web page, and market forces, paying people to clean it up and getting paid by SC Johnson to provide plastic so that they can market. They have, just using these simple tools, they have collected nearly 250 million pounds of plastic that might have washed into the ocean. It's incredible. And again, the technology is very simple, but because technology and information is so available, they can do these sorts of things. By way of contrast, there is another project out there, this is another private project, called the largest cleanup in history. And what they are trying to do is to remove plastic from the ocean. Now, it's a different problem, right? Collecting it on the beach is easier. They're trying to get it in the ocean. But I think it's a good comparison. They have these big boats and these big nets, and they go out into the Pacific Ocean, and they put these collectors at the mouths of rivers where plastic and other trash comes down, and they collect them. They go on late night TV. They call themselves the largest largest cleanup in history. How much have they removed? About 17 million pounds. So compare £250 million just with individual people and very simple technology to what calls itself the largest cleanup in history, 17 million pounds. That is the power of small efforts. It is the power of technology to multiply the effectiveness of every little step to have big environmental improvements. The United Nations last year signed a treaty to address ocean plastic. Who here thinks the United Nations treaty is going to be more effective than Plastic Bank? Plastic Bank is going to be far more effective, and they're doing it now, and they're scaling it up. It's funny, every time I give this speech, I have to go to the Plastic Bank webpage to get the new numbers because they go up so fast. That's how we're going to solve environmental problems effectively. And the power of thinking small is three things. First, it is sustainable and durable. It doesn't matter who is elected at the next election. If you have technology and personal incentives, people who get paid to pick up plastic or save electricity, other things like that, are going to continue to do that no matter who is in office. And technology will continue to improve. Second, it's adaptable. The reason that technology is being used in Southeast Asia countries and developing countries is that government isn't even an option there. The reason the problem is there is that government doesn't have good trash collection. Technology can go to places where there are not solutions, where government isn't even possible, and they can solve those problems. But it also happens right here in the United States. California didn't text people to ask them to conserve because they had a handle on the situation. They didn't have a handle on the situation. They knew that the system was under stress, and they asked people to help out, and it was effective. And they need to do more of that. We need to engage people so that they can solve these problems rather than hoping that politicians have figured it out. And last, it connects people to the problems directly. Environmental policy, because it is an identity issue, so many of our policies, the goal is, as the Portland Clean Energy Fund said, not about clean energy. It wasn't about climate change. It was about political issues. It was about an identity issue. When you connect people directly to the outcome, they make sure that they save energy, that they reduce ocean plastic, that they save species, that they provide habitat, because it's in front of them and they have accountability. And if they do something that doesn't work, they fix it. That is the power of small local efforts, and technology, information technology, allows us to do more than ever before to make an impact so that we can put 1970s environmental policy behind us. And conservatives and people on the center right need to stop treating the environment like it is a scary issue. Our policies work. We all care about environmental stewardship. And rather than seeing the environment as a Trojan horse for socialism, we ought to embrace it and say, we are the ones who actually have the policies that are going to make a difference and leave the planet better off than we found it. Thank you so much.